Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Pain, Heart and Home Healing After Loss. So today on the show, I have someone who I actually see quite often in person in real life, and that's because he is my doctor. But he's not just like a random average doctor that you think of like in a typical office, doctor's office in the medical field. He is the doctor that I was seeing and talking to quite often when both Rick, my husband, and I were at probably our worst as far as our health is concerned. And I give him a lot of credit for honestly just keeping me sane really during those crazy and chaotic times. But also just, helping us get healthy again. So today I have my doctor who I see at my local wellness center called Synergy Nutrition and Wellness, Dr. Joe Riccione. Dr. Joe, thank you so much for agreeing to be here today.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So first of all, okay, correct me if I say this wrong, but I think I have all the details right. You are a DO, which is an osteopathic doctor, which is different than
Correct.
just a typical MD because DOs take more of a holistic approach when treating their patients. Correct?
Yes, I think that's the big takeaway. A lot of times, traditionally primary care trained, but DOs can be brain surgeons, anything. So it kind of has a more of a holistic, vibe to it as far as that goes in the training. Um, whether people use it or not, you get trained in osteopathic manipulative treatment. The best way I can describe it, which people might shudder, would be like, hey, like chiropractic, hands on, whether it's an adjustment, whether it's other things. There's some DOs that just do that and only do that. And they might have a neuromuscular medicine or NMM type practice. And there are some local to us, even in Buffalo, Williamsville. But you could never do that again. You all got trained in it if you're a DO. And you could be a surgeon and pick up a scalpel and never look back. So, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay. And so before I get into any more questions, I just want to give you an opportunity to just quickly tell your story because you came from the traditional world of medicine. You were a doctor in what people would call, the traditional medical field, and you made the switch to this wellness center, Synergy Nutrition and Wellness, which is a way more holistic approach to health. So I just want to give you an opportunity to tell everyone who's listening your story and why you decided to make that switch.
Shame you have. No, I'm just kidding.
The short version.
So, honestly, for me, looking at things more holistically and non-traditional was more recent. All right. So it really goes back to my middle son, at like COVID, right? I'm in a big multi-specialty practice in Buffalo area. It's kind of like a mall for seniors, right? They love it because my primary's here, my cardiologist, my pulmonologist, my dermatologist. They have imaging downstairs. They've got a lab, like one-stop shopping. Great, okay? 65 and older are all about it, right? And this is all happening. It's, COVID. We're afraid to see sick patients. Fast forward, it's July of 21, right? But we're still have policies in a big organization like that of like, hey, did you screen? Can you treat them via phone? Can you do an e-visit and throw medicine at people through the internet? Like, do you have to have these people come in? Are they still being screened? Even though, we were at least personally getting over it, if not already, we were kind of done, all right, let's get back to normal a little bit. But anyway, all on a different front, on the home front at the same time, my middle son, we go out for 4th of July in PA with my uncle, got a huge house, does like a legit fireworks show for like our family, extended family. Like it could be like downtown Lancaster, the kind of stuff that was done. But it's in a backyard. And my son gets bit by something. It doesn't have to be a tick. It could be a black fly, mosquito, whatever. 2 weeks later, we're back home, and it's the first fever that hits my family, and we're thinking it's about time COVID found us, Not that we were doing anything crazy to avoid it. But, 101 fever, my leg kind of hurts, Dad. Okay, that can happen with a typical viral thing. And then, like, I notice a small, I don't know, quarter size, solid, whatever, pink rash in the left armpit area. Okay, that could be fungal, could be anything, right? And then the next day it's getting outside and wider and it's like outside the nipple line. Like, hey, that's a ring, that's a bullseye. I know what that is, kind of thing. And at the time, not that I don't follow rules anymore now, but it was like I would take my kids to the pediatrician even though I was a doctor. And they'd be like, they'd kind of half roll their eyes and be like, yeah, it's an ear infection, you know that, right? And I'm like, yeah, I guess I felt like I didn't want the pharmacy seeing that I was prescribing meds for my own kids, right? So I go to Google for Docs, which is called Up to Date, where you pay a membership and you get credits when you search for stuff, right? So I'm like, hey, what do you do for Lyme? Whether you have one bullseye rash or by the next day he had 12, it's early disseminated Lyme, and you do, at that point, he was 7 years old, and you would do amoxicillin 3 times a day for 2 weeks, or whatever it was. Okay, and so that was what was recommended. I didn't come in saying, you need to do this, whatever. I let them do their thing. They were like, oh, he's the third case this week. And again, granted, he probably contracted this in PA. Do you mind if we check his blood? And I'm like, I didn't know you guys did that here. Okay. And it's like, okay, of all my kids, he's the toughest in that way. So I'll hold him down or whatever. We'll get this blood sample. And like, they didn't withhold treatment, but it did fast forward. It showed acute Lyme. They do some testing, which is not that thorough in traditional medicine that I now know now after doing deeper dive in Lyme. They did a positive antibody or an antibody test that was positive with reflex Western blot or ELISA testing. And then he had 2 out of 3 bands for what they call IgM, which are the acute antibodies. So he was even CDC would recognize that as positive for acute Lyme. Okay. Anyway, I'll try to get too in depth and get a little more, move the story along. But so life is good, and rashes are gone within 36 hours of this antibiotic course. Okay, I was not of the holistic mind at all. They didn't do doxycycline because his teeth, they worried about at 7 years old. It can stain them. You can have cavitations, cavities, and stuff too. All right, I think they changed the rules a little bit on that since on the traditional side of treating Lyme acutely. Okay, which is antibiotics is what they do traditionally. As you know, we do other stuff now too. So fast forward, life is good. 6 months later, OCD, and it's getting in the way. First, it was like cute. It was like a mandated reporter, my son. I touched the lamp. Is that okay? I did this. Is that okay? And I'd be like, yeah, it's okay. You're like, wow. It's, that's new. Not getting in the way of daily life, daily grind. Okay. Then it was like not leaving the house, not going to the grocery store with mom, not fixated on one thing necessarily, but it was getting in the way of leaving the house. He wasn't washing his hands crazy, or you had to check the stove, or those things. He had a weird, and it didn't stem from anything, but it would be like scantily clad women who'd be like, I saw so-and-so's privates. And you're like, no, you didn't. Like, my wife being the, teacher was like, skin on skin. That's what you're seeing right there,
Right.
kind of thing. Like, you're not seeing anything you're not supposed to see. But there is that obsession and compulsion and need to say it. And, hey, I don't want to go grocery shopping because I'm going to see someone that's dressed like that and whatever. Like, where did this come from? Fast forward at the 9-month mark after acute Lyme was treated, then it's rage, physicality. All right, I'm getting texts from my wife, SOS texts, while I'm at, practicing big medicine that, hey, can you cancel the rest of your patients? I'm sitting on the other side of a door. We don't feel safe at home. Luca's raging, all right, kind of thing. So it's like, whoa, all right. So now we're physical. There's a complete lack of remorse. Like, there's a spiritual battle, I believe, going on too, of just like, whoa, is this like, does he need deliverance? Which I didn't speak like that before any of this. I didn't even know what that was. But it's like, whoa, blind rage, crime of passion, outer body experience, and there's a lack of remorse and a denial that he even did it. But it's like, look at your little brother's face. Like, what's going on with you, man? And you can't apologize to his face for doing that? So you like looked at him wrong, whatever. So it's like what is going on? I'm losing my sweet child, all right? And God has a sense of humor. I tell everybody that like I don't know, it had to be a year prior or so, a year and a half. I treat parents, they live on my street, they have kids, right? I don't treat the kids. They were seeing a pediatrician at the time. And they're like, hey, we took our daughter to this place in Rochester, New York, and they're great. She's got a whole team. They're using some antibiotics. They're using some herbs and supplements. They might do hyperbaric. They might do these other things, but so-and-so's got a whole team of people, and she's been diagnosed with this thing called PANS. And I'm like, all right, I might have to Google that and see what that is. or up to date it, right? Because I'm a doctor. So you do that, and then like you look it up, and pediatric acute neuropsychiatric syndrome, oddly specific symptoms, grades are going down, handwriting's getting worse, maybe some food intolerances, behavioral issues, attention down the tubes, all this kind of stuff. And it's like basically it's brain inflammation, and it usually is due to a chronic underlying infection. If it's strep, it's called PANDAS. It has its own little acronym for strep. Okay? So if it's not like dealt with accordingly or resolved, you can have chronic antibodies that are circulating. And then you have this wacky thing called molecular mimicry where up in an area of your brain, usually the basal ganglia, gets coated with these proteins that looks like the bad guy. You have IgG, antibiotic troops that are looking around for, in my kid's case, Lyme, or in someone else's case, mycoplasma, cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr, human herpes 6, human herpes 8. I'm sure there's some, not including parvo B19, slap cheek kind of stuff, the hand, foot, and mouth, a lot of it, which is Coxsackie. Those are kind of some of the common ones that are out there that your body will make troops like, hey, we're going to jump on this as soon as we see it next time. But then the area of your brain starts looking like that, and they attack. It's autoimmune encephalopathy, brain inflammation warded on by your immune system attacking that area, and has all these wacky symptoms. So he has that. We go there in Rochester, and they kind of offer us like traditional, like, hey, you can do antibiotics, and they tend to work faster. My wife's like, faster? Like, I'm home getting beat up by my own son, sitting on the other side of doors. Sometimes I don't feel safe. We have baby monitors set up in the playroom to like, is he going to choke out the little guy? That kind of stuff happening, right? We walked on eggshells for a year and a half at my house, all right? And, she was like, hey, we got to do whatever's faster. Like, and I was not of the holistic mindset. So I was like, yeah, okay. And then it would seem like whatever we did kind of had an issue, right? So that he was old enough now, let's do doxycycline, even though this is now chronic Lyme. We did do lab work through a company. If you talk to a lot of like Lyme literate people, right? They'd be like, ooh, iGenix, maybe Vibrant Wellness. I credit the clinic in Rochester, all right? I don't know how they got blood out of my kid because he was a squirrel in the office, like hiding under the chair. And then, like, you're a doctor, so you're trying to be all, like, play it cool, and you're like, oh my goodness, my kid's a squirrel in the exam room because he didn't have any control. But it wasn't his fault. He had brain inflammation and all these issues, right? So I don't know how she got a blood draw from him, but we ended up doing Vibrant Wellness, the Tick-Borne 2.0 panel. It's not cheap, all right? You pay out of pocket for it. But it showed Borrelia, which is the fancy word for Lyme, with co-infections, and co-infections are just common infections that tend to find themselves along with Lyme. Like ticks carry these other guys too, and they can get transmitted as well. So Bartonella, Babesia, Ehrlichia, Anaplasma. And then we had done like Pan's blood work for those common viral infections, and you see that he had like human herpes 6, human herpes 8, and Coxsackie, whatever. So it's like all this stuff. And then it's like, at the time, you probably didn't have to go after everything, but that was kind of our approach, not knowing a lot of holistic stuff. And then, we kind of were spinning our wheels. Doxycycline caused teeth staining that did go away, but it caused all these cavities. So now I've got a holistic dentist locally, right? And that's all out of pocket. And you're like, oh my goodness, Then it was, hey, we're going to go see my parents in Fort Myers. All right. They lived in the house I grew up in forever in Philadelphia. All right. And then they moved to Florida and everything's new. And all of a sudden, my parents really care about their furniture in their house, okay? So we're coming there with a kid who's, not doing the best mental status-wise, and my other two boys and my wife, and we're staying with them, right? Oh my goodness, worst vacation ever, right? Behavior. Luca's got a facial rash. He's reacting to everything. At that time, it was right before we kind of like, we got to go gluten-free. We got to calm down inflammation any other way that we can. And we found out the hard way during that trip. So behavioral-wise, batty, just a crazy, experience, right? So far to the point that, like, I'm apologizing to the older son and the younger son, like, I'm going to take you guys back separate. Like, oh my goodness, our vacation. And it wasn't any of my middle child's fault. It was out of his control. But it was like, oh my goodness. We had done a steroid right before that thinking, hey, let's calm down some brain inflammation. So on top of Pan's rage, it was like roid rage. And this thing was like a disaster. So it was kind of like strike two on the traditional medical side. And then it was like, you know what? For my son, I think we need to go more of a holistic route. And then at the same time, professionally, I'm getting beat up, COVID burnout. We don't see sick patients anymore. What am I doing? Why did I go into medicine in the first place to help people? Now I feel like, I can't necessarily do that, or I was going to do anything, including prescribing ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, whatever. There were protocols that were out there by doctors that weren't quacks. And we had oh my goodness, Zev Zelenko at the time, some other providers that were had protocols that they were using and maybe having some success with keeping people out of the hospital. I remember sending a primary care department system-wide email of hey guys, what are you doing for COVID patients? It's 2021 right now, because they go to the urgent cares, they get swabbed, they get positive, and then they're supposed to call us. What are you guys telling people to do? And it might be I give them a Z-Pack, or I tell them there's nothing to do for it. Call me when you turn blue, whatever. Or, I'm hey, and it was kind of a baiting email, but it was and I made it very doctor friendly. Here's the protocols by some other docs. Do you guys do any of this stuff? Have you gotten any pushback from pharmacies trying to prescribe these things that are, quote, repurposed, off-label, whatever you want to call them? But we do a lot of off-label prescribing in traditional medicine, like birth control for skin and acne, right? Those kinds of things. So that kind of stuff isn't necessarily new. So that's going on at the same time. I'm kind of greedy with emails of nah, I would never do that stuff, or hey, I tried to do that and the pharmacy said no for that reason of COVID, so I never really asked again or tried to do it, so it was either not attacked by it, but kind of hey, I would never do that. That would be dangerous to do that or whatever, or hey, I tried it, it didn't work, so I know I can't do it. I got not my hand slapped, but the pharmacist said no, not for that reason, and whatever. So it's a little weird. But anyway, that's happening. The home front, losing on both fronts, and got to make a holistic change. There's no training, right? It's not, I didn't all of a sudden, hey, I did this certification or that kind of thing. I'll have other doctors that reach out to me now locally that trained with me or went through the same program in Buffalo through Sisters Hospital, and they're like, hey, maybe I'm getting a little burnt out. What did you do? Did you take some course? Did you get certified in functional medicine, like a certificate, and take credits in that? And I'm like, no, it was baptism through fire with my son. It really was. And then I found synergy. So again, I'm all about giving back and giving credit due where credit is due. And it was, the owner, Jimmy Scaringi, worked with Andy Benzin, and really got some headways with working with who is now a naturopathic doctor with them. She trained further while she's been working there, Dr. Maria McHenry. So that was huge, where I learned a lot. Hey, he has anger and rage. In Chinese medicine, that is liver. We got to open up liver drainage. Because we got into a rut at this Rochester clinic, and it's no bad blood or anything, where we were kind of treating symptoms, using Eastern tools, herbs, supplements, different things, but still treating symptoms and spinning our wheels. And it was hard to get anything and everything into our 7-year-old kid at the time. So when you get a supplement in, you finally get it in, and you're getting multiple of them in, perhaps a laundry list of them in, and you're not seeing any benefit, you're kind of man, what are we doing here? Are we missing the mark? Are we just making this, treating Western-minded treatment of symptoms with non-prescription type things and just not getting to the root of anything? And that's where it was let's get rid of a lot of stuff with Dr. Maria. Let's open up liver drainage. Let's see what we test for toxin-wise using this applied kinesiology or muscle testing, which we can get more into. That's what Synergy Nutrition and Wellness does day in and day out. If you see a practitioner there who is not myself, and they trained me in it as well, I got certified in doing it, but you're seeing them for applied kinesiology and muscle testing and basically getting manual biofeedback of toxins, aka stressors that are on your body, which organs are optimal or non-optimal, which one is the priority, who do we need to fix first and prop up first, and kind of gives you a little bit of a path. And you could combine that with even functional blood work like we initially got. We kind of did this piecemeal, and we probably didn't have to go after every infection that that my son tested for, right? And we could probably have used that to maybe hone in a little more on what do we need to go after. I think Bartonella, that tick co-infection, was huge. If you look that up, Lyme literate people, a lot of behavioral stuff, almost like bipolar symptoms. I had 2 months between me deciding to leave my medical practice, big multi-specialty group, right? I was salaried, it was stable, it was comfortable, right? But that's not always the way that God works, right? Um, to then take a leap, you know, buy your own medical record system, partner with a company in a vision that you believe in with Synergy Nutrition and Wellness and Jimmy Scaringi. And I had 2 months before this building was like ready um, to actually see patients in. So I'm kind of binging on Lyme literate stuff. ILADS is the International Lyme and Associated Diseases, like kind of consortium or organization that does a lot of Lyme literate stuff. And I'm watching, these PowerPoints where you pay, put $56 in the machine for a webinar, and we'll have some top line people talk and whatever. And they did this slide or the show that was, hey, we took 10 people from the inpatient psych ward, drew their blood, 9 out of 10 were positive for chronic Bartonella antibodies. And it's like, oh, does that have something to do with why they're crazy and why they can't be part of society right now? Maybe it does. Not that I think everything is Lyme, but there's probably a lot more out there. And May is Lyme Awareness Month, and I'm already getting the texts and the emails and the posts about tick on my kid, on me, on my pet. What do we do? Things like that. But yeah.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
yeah, I can let you direct me further because I tend to derail. So.
No, yeah, no, that's great. And that story about your son is just crazy. I actually didn't know that the Lyme disease started from a bite. Like I've heard your story. I've heard the story about your son a bunch because we've talked about it, but I didn't know that that's where it all stemmed from. And so I hope somebody's listening I hope they're not going through the same thing, but I hope that his story can maybe, shed some light on, another, parent's child situation and maybe help them see that the term that I love that you just use is spinning their wheels, because I feel like that is what a lot of people do in the traditional medical world. When they go to their doctors, they are just constantly there spinning their wheels. And I feel like a lot of people who even might not be dealing with Lyme disease or anything super crazy or any, outrageous autoimmune disease or something like that, but they can't really, quite feel like their best selves. They can't get a hold on, why can't I just feel good? Where's my energy? Where's my, that feeling good feeling, that mental health, that clarity, all of those things. And that's what people do. They spin their wheels. And so, like you just said, Synergy Nutrition, the difference between this wellness center is they get to the root of the problem. And you mentioned that, like, let's stop slapping Band-Aids on all of the symptoms and let's get to the root of the issue. And that's why I started going, because, I mean, I was a mess, like, when I first started coming to you. And disclaimer, I'm not saying that medicine and traditional doctors, like actual medicine, don't have their place in healing and health. Like, there are, of course, certain circumstances where medicine and prescriptions are absolutely necessary, and in some cases potentially life-saving, which honestly, in my husband's case, that might have been the case. I'll never know for sure, but
Sure.
But I definitely know that for me, I want to talk about my story a little bit, because I think it'll resonate with a lot of people, because I again, even if you don't have this crazy autoimmune disease or this crazy, story about how, you have Lyme and whatever, I feel like people are probably more unhealthy than they realize. And what I'm getting to is, when I first started coming to you, I had just gone through, an insane time in my life. I was a mess. Like, and I'm sure you remember. I literally remember thinking, like, everything is wrong with me. I was dealing with some really weird and seemingly unexplained symptoms, which I feel like a lot of people deal with. And other than seeing my OB doctor while I was pregnant for 9 months, I really hadn't been seeing a doctor regularly prior to that. Because I was pretty healthy. But then once all that adrenaline wore off from giving birth, and then it being a stillbirth at that, it was a huge, life shakeup. Like, I was in rough shape. I had all the symptoms, all of the issues, physically, mentally, emotionally, And so I guess my question is I know the answer to this, but I kind of want to just like talk it through with you because you and I have never really gone back and talked it through. But I want to show people what our experience looked like, because if I would have walked into a traditional doctor's office, like a traditional MD with no holistic approach or no any sort of holistic anything, I probably would have walked out with some sort of antidepressant, some sort of anti-anxiety medication, probably a lot of weird looks like, this girl's crazy. Which you might have done that too. I'll never know. But that's okay because I was a little crazy. But we figured it out and we got there. But anyways, and most I can't, I'm not going to make a blanket statement, but most traditional doctors in the traditional medical field like probably wouldn't have taken my current situation or my current circumstances into consideration when looking at me as a whole and going like, what do we need to do here? So for somebody like me who had suffered a serious loss, and you don't even really have to suffer a serious loss to get to the point where I was. It was even when I was just dealing with my husband's health. Like, I wasn't even the one who was dealing with the health, but I was going through an insanely stressful time, which, most people on planet Earth would consider themselves stressed and busy and their lives are chaotic and all these things. I needed a lot of help and a lot of support. And my body was on overload and I was super stressed and dealing with all these symptoms. I was living in fight or flight, which I think a lot of people do that and they don't even realize. I had all these red flags going off, but there was no emergency. So when I came in, like, I guess my question is first of all, how did you know where to start? Because again, I can look back and go, oh, I see what he did here. But when you look at someone who's like, okay, I don't have Lyme, I don't have this crazy autoimmune disease, but I have all these symptoms, whatever, like, where do you start? Where did you start with somebody like me?
Right. And again, I don't have your notes out to, zoom back and
Of
look
course.
and HIPAA and all that. But yes, I mean, with what you were going through with your husband's chronic health and being a chronic caretaker, obviously we knew stress was high. And then, I mean, a loss, like, oh my goodness, right? So
Right.
compounded, stress in your body stress is one input. It's just like stress coming in, the organ or gland that's really going to receive it and have to react is going to be your adrenals. So, I'd have to look back and like, oh yeah, your adrenals were the priority. I would be, 99.9% positive that they were. All right. And
And they still are most
I
times.
say it again, I'm sorry.
I said, and they still are most times when I
Yeah,
correct.
yeah. Yes. So, they were just, what's hard is they were lifting way too much for way too long, and then your body might downregulate cortisol. You can have high cortisol for a while, and then a lot of people might say a traditional doctor caves and orders AM morning cortisol on you. By that time, maybe your adrenals aren't putting it out, and it's normal or it's on the lower side. Your stress can't be high. Your cortisol's not high, by their lab standards or reference range. But that's where I love, like, when I see a new patient, we're doing a physical exam unless they are like, I have no need or want to do that. But typically I'm doing a head to toe physical exam. And then we switch gears and go on the, eastern side to the applied kinesiology. And that's where it's like, whoa, adrenals are a 7 out of 10 on my scoring scale and they're your priority organ. So say you had, adrenal, liver, small intestine, right? Gut, liver is like your body's filter for toxins. Those are probably common areas that are hitting somebody and not optimal in someone that went through half the stuff you went through, whatever, right? So that was a big deal. And that's like, all right, I got 3 dominoes stacked up next to each other is how I approach it. And I want to know who's domino number 1, because when it falls, it knocks down 2 and 3. So we have a way of figuring that out. Pushing on your arm using this manual applied kinesiology, crazy, right? I'm still amazed by it. But I zoom out and take this Christian approach of like, God made the body in his image and likeness. Maybe it can be that simple, And not that I denounce my degree, it's good for things, and I still use medicine when I need to, right? As you said, there's still a place for, traditional medicine, but I don't always go there first. And we'll offer people choices of, hey, what do you want to do? But if you're paying out of pocket to see me, I'm going to give you my opinion because you're paying for it, right? And that otherwise I'm not giving you the service you're paying for, right? So I'd be like, hey, here's what I would do. If you were dead set on getting on a medication, I wouldn't have denied you that. But I want to offer people other things. We can always go to, pharmacy if we need to. But you're right. We're very quick in traditional medicine typically to go right to pharmacy because it tends to be, hey, we've got these symptoms. Now I have a diagnosis, and I used to think I was a great diagnostician. Hey, I diagnosed those symptoms. That's MS. That's this. Oh, now I punt to a specialist because I'm primary care, to a neurologist for MS. Or hey, now what drug do I, when you look up the treatment, it's usually pharmacology based. What do you prescribe for that, right? So then this just opened up a world of being able to help people without prescribing things. You still can recommend things, but we needed to boost and support your adrenals. The term adrenal fatigue, all right, and I was guilty of rolling my eyes at that when I was, up to my eyes in traditional medicine. Like endocrinologists don't necessarily recognize that term. Like either your cortisol is high or low, and that's this diagnosis, or not. There's not like an adrenal fatigue thing, but there's all kinds of stuff that happens when you're stressed, and it's hard to quantify stress. And you got different forms: mental, emotional, physical. You could work out too hard and have an injury, right? You could toxic stressors, which is what we kind of excel in, right, and look at with the test kits that we do and test you for. It's kind of like the usual suspects that cause issues, and that's Lyme and Lyme co-infections are on there because they should be checked in people. Mold mycotoxins, which a lot of people are living in water damaged homes and may or may not realize it and are chronically sick or whatever. There's parasites, believe it or not, and that's not a hygiene thing. There's different bacteria, there's heavy metals, there's environmental toxins, there's things like radon. Do you have a radon mitigation system? I remember when we bought our first house, we were like newbies and we were all like, we're not going in the house unless you put that in before we get in there, and now we're probably a little more like, all right, we could probably check the level and go from there or whatever. Radiation, Wi-Fi, EMF kind of stuff, all these things. And then there's things like negative emotions. You hang around negative people, you're a product of a negative environment, that affects you. That will cause dis-ease, and dis-ease is disease if left, not treated, right? Not dealt with. And that gets into stuff that I've gotten a little more into, like Dr. Emoto, a Japanese doctor who passed away, but he was big on the whole water making imprints, and like you could write a positive affirmation like, hey, I love you, Emily, you're a great person, this podcast is a blessing to so many, which it is, and you write that and have it by water, or the water holds memory and imprints that. And then you look at it under a microscope and it's got this beautiful snowflake pattern, whatever. And then, you write something like, oh my goodness, you're a terrible person. I hope you don't wake up tomorrow. Like whatever, all this negative energy and stuff you put out there, and write that on a paper. And then you look at it on either a soundboard with like sand or dirt on it, or water, which does hold memory, and we're 80% water, right? And it looks all fragmented. It's like, hey, you listen to death metal or you listen to Christian music? Probably going to have different frequencies and different effects on your health, so we don't necessarily, I got more into that again because my faith had to really grow and deepen, and I'm sure yours did as well, when you're in that valley. And until you're there, you're kind of like, I'm doing good, I'm a good person, I think I'm on the right path, hey, I help people, I'm a doctor, I'm good. And then you're like, oh my goodness, then we got into like more Holy Spirit kind of charismatic stuff. I mean, you're a cradle Catholic, right? Or like, I go to church on Sunday, I'm good, right? And then, you're like cutting off people on the parking lot on the way out, which again, it's not all Catholics, and we know very charismatic Catholics, right? But, our faith really had to deepen on this journey. So I know I'm going all over the place, but for you, it was, all right, how do I help this young lady who has so much going on? Where can I focus? My intention, which is big, when I do, muscle testing, applied kinesiology, nutrition response testing, they're all synonymous terms, all right, is, hey, again, I take the Christian approach. Hey, Lord, Holy Spirit, how do I help Emily here? What do we need to go after first? steer me, guide my hands, just like a surgeon might pray before surgery. I hope they do, to guide their hands, help me do what needs to be done and get out of here safely and get this, get Rick doing well here and on the right path, whatever, right? So that kind of approach. And I like that method because, man, you get a priority organ or gland, and it's like, this is where we need to focus first. Or you get I forget if it was you get a kid or an adult with constipation. It's like, wow, you can't get toxins out effectively. You're not eliminating toxins. It's not the time to detox for you. We had to open up what we call drainage pathways. All right. And that was obviously a part two. So for you, it was probably boosting adrenals and opening your body's, quote, drainage pathways. And drainage, I tell all my patients, is the $1,000,000 word for opening up the natural pathways that I believe God gave you and gave the body to get rid of toxins. If they're not open, you're like a big funnel. And if you're constipated, it's not open at the bottom. How can you affect things? How can you get rid of toxins? We live in a toxic world. Air, food, and water, and it's not meant to make people afraid of the world, but what are you doing to deal with that? Because I also tell patients, you'll find no shortage of opinions online, and there's a lot of good stuff online, and wow, it's stuff we can learn and about our health and what can help us. But a lot of times, like, hey, this worked for me, start this, L-theanine, add this, low dose naltrexone worked for me, get on it, Emily. You need to take this, you need to do this, you need to put this stuff in. And then where I think Synergy definitely excels is like, all right, we got to open up drainage pathways, boost organs or glands that need some support and help. And we got to get the bad stuff out first before we start cramming all this good stuff in. And I think that's where we got in a rut with my son initially, was like, take this, get this in. And none of it was addressing, what needed to get out or things. The other thing too is, seeing you at your, let's call it rock bottom, wherever it was, like, oh, in your lowest state or whatever, mentally, physically healthy, whatever state. That didn't happen overnight. You have this toxic bucket, all right, and that it filled up, and then throw health conditions that your husband was going through, throw a personal loss in there, and it's just like overflowed, the bucket spilled. But knowing that it might seem like symptoms showed up on this day, like they did for my son in whatever it was, July of 2021, that was building up. There were other underlying toxic stressors and things that then got to that tipping point where theoretically you or I could have gotten bit by the same insect, all right, and not had anything if our toxin bucket was not full. So like, that's our goal with you at future visits, is like keeping that thing. Yeah, we don't want to just play whack-a-mole every time and like, oh, we got to go after this, up, spilled again, let's pick it back up. We want to try to keep things at bay and keep you on the up and up. And yeah, life's going to happen and you're not going to be free of stressors. It's not, that's just how it won't be like that for either of us. But yeah, so I hope I answered that in a very roundabout way, which is kind of my jam.
Yeah, no,
As you
that's
know.
fine because you touched. Yeah, no, that's okay because you touched on a handful of things that I wanted to talk about anyways. And you mentioned so many good things there. You listed off a bunch of things that affect us in life. You talked about the toxins and the things that the EMF, like all of the things in the world that have an effect like on our bodies that people don't realize. And I remember for me specifically, I talked a lot about probably more with my grief coach, but you and I definitely discussed it and you gave me tools and resources. We talked about like regulating my nervous system. So on top of, doing whatever supplements I needed and opening up my drainage pathways and all of these things, we talked about, regulating my nervous system. That was a huge thing for me. And unfortunately, even for people who think they're pretty healthy or at least don't have any like major health issues, if they're not being super intentional about it, they probably have a pretty dysregulated nervous system and they don't even realize it. They don't even know that that's their problem. And I know for me, like, that's really on top of the things that you just listed, focusing on my liver and supporting my adrenals and regulating my nervous system. Like, other than that, like, I didn't take any medication. I was basically doing these simple nervous system regulation practices and, taking a handful of supplements and I did work a lot with my grief coach, on the emotional side of things, and focusing on nutrition. And it was like you said, it was a slow and steady process. It wasn't an antibiotic by any means. But these practices are what got me through. And like, I'm not a nervous wreck anymore. Like, okay, is it as fresh? And am I tied to my husband's hospital bed? Well, no, but I don't even want to think about all of the things I would have to be dealing with now if I had decided to just pop some pills to mask the pain when I was going through it. And like I said, I'm not dealing with a lot of these symptoms anymore. I take a handful of supplements, daily, and I focus on the basics. I focus on that handful of things like that you just mentioned, like the drainage pathways. We focus on making sure that my liver is optimal, and my castor oil packs to open that up. And I focus on movement and nutrition. And you just said something that I really like. Get the bad out before you put the good stuff in. Like, if your bucket is full of bad crap, like, there's no room for the good. The good stuff doesn't matter if there's no room for it. And so that's another thing that I really focus on, is eliminating the bad, the toxins and all of those things. So I guess to put this in really practical terms for people listening, whether you have Lyme disease or not, whether you have, Crohn's and colitis like my husband or not, it doesn't have to be a crazy fancy term or this dramatic autoimmune disease. But most people are not living their most healthy lives. Most people are not their optimal selves. And so I guess my question would be, for people listening, what are I don't know, I don't want to put a number on it, but maybe the top 2 or 3, however many you want to list, things like holistic practices that you can recommend to people that anybody can do, and they'll be better off because of it, if that makes sense. Their health will be better off because of it.
Yeah, on the spot, but it's good. I like it.
I know you know the
I
answer
mean,
though.
there's stuff that's free too. All right, and then
Yeah.
I'll quote Dr. Maria or whatever on this, but getting early morning sun on quote naked eyes. If you wear glasses, get them off. Through your windshield doesn't count. All right, through your windows does not count. All right, so it's tough. We're in Western New York, and finally the sun came out like last week or whatever, right? So get out there, early morning sun on naked eyes, fire up the mitochondria, right? Because you cannot detox, an organ cannot move toxins if the cells themselves don't have their engines working, which is the mitochondria. We're going back to Bio 101, the mighty mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cells, right? Turns out I thought that was only needed for the first standardized test you take in med school, which is the USMLE Step 1 or COMLEX, whatever it is, 1 for DOs. Turns out that's like one of the most important things, and you never talk about it again in med school, or you never think about it as much when you're out there practicing. But the mitochondria are huge. So fire it up with, the good UV that's out there, early morning sun, dusk, later evening sun, get out there, right? Other things that are free, grounding, right? Bare feet on the soil, not on the pavement or whatever, but like on actual earth, huge. All right. So again, we're in a tough climate in Western New York and Buffalo area, right? But doing that is huge. All right. And just those are some things that are free. Yeah, you got to take the time to do it like anything else. And then, I mean, honestly, if you're not having regular bowel movements, you're not going to be moving toxins effectively. So find something natural that's not called Miralax that aids you in going, whether it's a form of magnesium, whether it's bowel mover by Cellcore or intestinal cleanse 1 if you're an adult can swallow pills, intestinal cleanse 1 if you got kids, intestinal cleanse 3 is a liquid one. Again, you got to see somebody who knows what they're doing and can dose this stuff for you. But that's huge. I'll see kids on the spectrum that poop once a week. Wow, they're filling up with 7 times the amount of toxins as their counterparts or even their sibling that might eat the same stuff. And maybe their diet's not that clean. Get rid of the red dyes. I know I'm going all over the place. Get rid of the food dyes, the MSG, the high fructose corn syrup. Those are all liver toxins. Okay, so then you're gunking up your filter that's trying to get rid of toxins for you. And now it's working with one hand behind its back now. Okay, so it can't get rid of nearly half the toxins that it wants to get rid of for you, and you'll feel the brunt of that, right? Drainage is huge. And again, people that do this can kind of help guide you there. If you need mitochondrial support, I mean, that usually you think of like, hey, fatigue, brain fog, those kinds of symptoms, have someone that can assess the adrenals because, man, if they're not happy, it's going to be hard to fire things out. But those are kind of the big things. The other thing, too, like the new multivitamin, I would say, would be binders. But, if you're not binding toxins on a regular basis, you're probably filling up with them in this world. What kind of water are you drinking? What are you using to clean up that water? There's different things. Distilled is the cleanest, but it's devoid of minerals. I would never tell everyone, you better drink distilled and period, end of sentence. They probably need to add back or take some kind of minerals, trace minerals or something, unless they're seeing something like us that can, someone like us that can test you and see if you need to add those in or not. So you can leach minerals from the body if you're just drinking distilled, and you aren't taking minerals if you need them, and most people do. Okay, so clean up the water, clean up the food that's coming in. We can't out supplement a poor diet and lifestyle. Sleep also huge. We take it for granted. We used to pull all-nighters, med school, we cram for finals, we would do all that kind of stuff. Now it destroys us, right? So sleep is huge, and it should be a priority, a routine of getting to bed by this time. Am I guilty of not doing that? I'm human, yeah. Maybe it's 80-20 and trying to be better with that. But those are things that are, the sunshine, the grounding, and sleep are free. You just got to prioritize them and do them. And they can be big things. Obviously, cutting out sugar, and whether that's keto or extreme, and ketosis is a metabolic state, not a diet. So Maria McKendry is a great source on that. You don't have to be a patient of ours to do her online, Facebook group courses, which are excellent. You learn the physiology behind it, the why behind it, and anybody that's cancer or wants to lose weight or, diabetic and wants to shed meds or whatever, like can benefit from, ketosis and learning about that process. And if you're insulin resistant, which is a big common thread in a lot of the chronic disease, diabetes, PCOS, right, polycystic ovarian syndrome in females. A lot of these things are insulin resistant is really the thread. The high insulin levels are really driving the process. And then, so how do we lower insulin? You have less carbs coming in, higher protein, higher fat, and ideally probably more time between meals. So then that's where it can be coupled with intermittent fasting. I realize fasting is not for everyone. You gotta listen to your body too, So yeah, a lot of stuff in that, of course, but it's a whole approach. It's all hands on deck. It's Synergy Nutrition and Wellness does get more into nutrition than probably I do. If you might have heard, a lot of doctors are not trained in nutrition at all. There's no I must have missed the one day that we did nutrition in med school, or really it doesn't exist. You know what I mean? So I was absent that day, and so was everybody else in my class, and that has initials after their name of MD or DL, right? So, that's not a strong point for medical training, but it becomes more important. And I just gave some very basic stuff, but obviously there's practitioners that could focus on that at Synergy, if needed, if that's where people want to start. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So a couple of things really quick I just want to touch on that you said there. First of all of those things are incredible things. I do most of those that you just said. And like you said, start with the free stuff. Like a lot of this stuff is not, well, some of it is it is a financial investment, and I'll get there in a second. But some of these things are free. Like there are lots of ways to get the resources you need to find, figure them out what they are. And then there's lots of ways to do these things for free. But the second thing that the word that you use that I need everybody to hear is prioritize. Like your health has to be a priority. You have to decide that I'm going to prioritize this with my time and with my money. Like, yes, there are some free things, but there are other things that aren't free. Like, it just is what it is. Almost nothing in life is free. Like when it comes to, stuff, supplements, treatments, whatever they are. And you have to decide that this is going to be a priority. Like, I think one of the problems that people have in life when it comes to their health is like, they don't want to think about it. They just, oh, I have this problem. Oh, I have this problem. And they kind of just, they want it to go away. And it's like, okay, but that's not how, like, literally anything in life works. You have to, there's an issue in anything, relationships, like your kids, your house, like you got a leaky something. Like, it doesn't just go away. You can't just, take a pill and it's going to go away. Like, you have to prioritize, like we've talked about this whole time, getting to the root of that problem. And so I'm really glad that you use that word, because that is a message that I try to, like, shout from the rooftops to anybody who will listen to me, that if you want to be in good health and you want to get off the meds and, find joy again after loss or after devastation or whatever it is, or, just live your best life, your best self, like, you have to prioritize it. It's going to take time. It's not a Band-Aid, but that's a good thing. You're getting to the root of the issue. You're actually solving these problems. And so I wish more people would choose to prioritize it. And so that's really the big message that I want to get across today. So I guess just to kind of wrap things up, to anybody who's listening, if you feel like in your health you have been spinning your wheels, I really like that term that you use, because I feel like that is how a lot of people live their lives. They're spinning their wheels when it comes to their health, and they can't really get a hold on, whether it's big issues or I'll say small issues, which I think any health issue is, worth addressing. And you feel like you're spinning your wheels, if you're local to us, in the Buffalo area, I can't recommend Synergy Nutrition and Wellness more. And anybody that asks me what I'm doing, who I'm seeing, whatever, I always tell them to check you guys out. Although you guys are super busy now, like way busier than when I first started seeing you, which is great. That's a good, yeah, it's a good thing. So if you're in the local area, definitely check them out. But if you're not local, like, I urge you to look into, if you feel like you're spinning your wheels and you can't get, a grip on your health, to look into some sort of wellness center or some sort of place that can help you get to the root of these problems that you're having, and not just continue to slap Band-Aids on. And find people that really, really care about what you're going through, and, your lifestyle, and, like I said, just really getting to the root of this problem, because I don't know where the heck I would be. I really don't, without my holistic grief coach and, seeing you, and you guys just, again, not just looking at me and go, all right, what do you need? Okay, here's your Band-Aid, and just really talking these things through with me. And so anyways, I'm just very grateful. So
We appreciate it. I would
yeah.
say one other thing in parting or whatever, that, like, be careful, right? Words matter. We all want a diagnosis because we want to know why we feel so bad or whatever, right? But, like, that diagnosis has power, and we don't want it to have power over you, right? I'm not saying ignore the diagnosis, but, like, there was a point on my son's journey where, like, we refer, like, he was Lyme disease to us, right? He epitomized it, and it's like, no, we're giving that power over him. And it could be someone like MS. I have multiple sclerosis and I have these symptoms, and it's like, I am MS, right? It's like, no, again, I go with the spiritual word. You're a child of God. That's what I believe. And you have these symptoms and this condition and this diagnosis code and this long list of ICD-10 codes that we use for billing or whatever, right? We don't, because we don't go through insurance. But, don't let that have power over you. There's a spiritual component to healing as well. And you got to kind of make sure you're not in a spiritual agreement with your illness, with your disease, with sickness, and you want to be in spiritual agreement with health, because you can kind of become your condition and just be like, I'm Lyme, I'm mold, I'm whatever, and there's no hope, and you lose that so those words, that mindset is huge. Yeah, surround yourself with positive people that care about you, that are going to check in with you, and that kind of thing, for sure.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I'll just use my husband super quick as an example. Like, when he was at his worst, like, he was sleeping all day, super infected, like, didn't know what was going on. Like, that is one thing, like, every day, probably multiple times a day, that I did. I just went over to wherever he was, and he was probably sleeping, and I just, rested my hand on him, and I literally just spoke the words, like, I speak life. Well, I'm going to get emotional. And health and wellness and, all these things. And I just spoke it over him. And because he couldn't do it for himself, And so, and so sometimes like that's what gets us through is sometimes is literally just like even if it if even if you don't look healthy, you don't feel healthy, like when we speak those things and we tell ourselves I'm speaking life and health and wholeness and wellness like over ourselves, like identifying with that is, which nowadays I hate that word, but I the point you're trying to make is when you identify as a sick person, like all hope is lost. So why would you act like you can be healthy? Why would you act like you can be, helped if you are constantly identifying as a sick person? And so I really like that point, and that's a really good way to kind of wrap things up because it's huge. It all starts with your mind, like knowing that there's hope, knowing that there is help, and knowing that you can improve and get better is like step number one. So that's a really good
Yeah,
point.
I think, God wants to use your struggle for good. The evil one wants to use it as a foothold to like just tear you apart. You know what I mean? So
Right.
which way are you going to go? And I know it's like, oh, I get to choose, whatever. You have some say in it, your mindset and, your will and all of that. And remember that, with whatever you're going through. And it can seem bleak. And like, I don't remember the last time I felt well, right? We see a lot, we attract patients that are like that, right? Because we're kind of nichey with what we do. But you got to instill that hope. Man, we have these prayer meetings at my house that I invite patients to, and I'm like, it's not a HIPAA thing. I'm not going to say one word about you. Someone might pick up on something, honestly, about you. Someone might be like, you got to go back and you got to forgive this person. You got to get forgiveness from this person. These kind of like spiritual blockades to healing that might need to be turned down because, you know, yeah. So there can be stuff that gets in the way spiritually, in addition to, like chemically and toxicities and those kinds of things. So don't neglect that side of things because that could be a large percentage too, of getting you well.
Definitely. For sure. Oh, and I'm
Different for
sure that
different
was a,
people.
yeah, and I'm confident that that was a huge part of what was going on with both myself and my husband. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so well, anyways, this has been so informative, and truly, I'm not sure where how I would have gotten through some of my most difficult times in life without this incredible knowledge and you just teaching me and guiding me through while I was at my worst. And I hope there really are some listeners today who hear this and it makes them want to make the switch from simply just listening to only traditional medicine and maybe incorporate some of those holistic healing practices in as well. So thank you, Dr. Joe, for being here today and helping me through this whole thing. And thank you to everybody who is listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, and I hope you were listening well and maybe even taking some notes. Be sure to subscribe to hear more episodes just like this one, and don't forget a positive review is really helpful and goes a really long way for me. I can't wait to chat with you all again really soon. Signing off for now, your hope dealer, Emmy Smales.